Right, okay, so let's have a look at what we've got down here. So in terms of our group, we definitely looked at responsibility. We looked at more of the human element. We looked at the care element, the value element. We kind of didn't look at very corporate stuff like this, which is about supervision and management and working conditions, expenses, status within a volunteer role, and volunteer job security. Didn't talk about any of these type of things. We didn't talk about recognition because maybe as individuals ourselves, we don't require recognition or to be visible within a voluntary arena. It's important for a volunteer to be recognized in terms of what they actually do, which I found quite interesting. And please feel free to put any messages in the box. We can actually answer them a bit later if you like. Right, okay, so this is going to be the stage that we get to when all your individual pilots begin. And what we hope to do is establish a process for you so then you can actually follow. So in terms of recruitment, what we're going to have to focus on is the simplest process possible. So we need something that's going to be easy to follow, easy to understand. We're going to have to allow volunteers something that's accessible. For instance, it could be a taster session, for instance. It's essentially, it's going to be something that will appeal to volunteers. I don't know, things like try before you buy, anything like that. So in terms of a role, it's about the description of it, and we'll go into detail a little bit more later on. Just to be clear, everyone wants to know how many hours that they work, and generally we all do in our jobs anyway, and where we're going to work, what we're going to have to do, what the benefits going to be for us. But more importantly, we're going to need to know about what the pilot is, what the focus is of the organization, what do you hope to achieve, and who are you going to help support. And again, if there is any age restrictions, which I'm pretty sure everything's going to be 18 plus, I'm sure that's the case, isn't it? But again, it's important to make it clear and easy to understand.
Certainly, sorry, John, when you're putting your role descriptions together, just make sure that they don't read like a job description. That's vitally important. Concentrate on the tone and the language that you use. Again, don't structure it like a job description. It is a role description.
Did I say job description, Harry?
No, you didn't actually, John, but I just wanted to mention it.
Which is what I do say all the time. Clearly the wrong thing to say. This is an example of the MS Society, which we thought was a really good example.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to point out in orange the reasons why I think it's a good example. First of all, it covers all the areas that we just mentioned, like the little description of the organization, what they're going to be doing, and in terms of who they're going to support, are they going to develop in terms of skills. But I've highlighted there in terms of the positive language that we've used, in terms of belonging, unity, friendship, which are all the things that we spoke about in terms of motivators a bit earlier on, in the breakout room. But it's about support, development, communication and interpersonal skills. But more importantly, it's about supporting people affected by MS. And that's the main goal. It's the main driving point and inspiring point for most volunteers. And I think that's quite simple and straightforward. And it continues on briefest bullet points. And it's all about empowering people about being involved in the local community. It's about being responsible and having the responsibility to actually act upon any situation that might happen. And importantly, dependent on your age and also skill set, that an organisation is going to be invested in you. Have I missed anything out there, Barry?
No, obviously the words that you've highlighted are very positive. Again, look at the language and the tone of the role description itself, and just keep it soft rather than you are required to, which you would probably find in a job description. So again, remember that volunteers, they're giving up their time for free, aren't they? So the role really needs to sing to them. What are the benefits to them? You know, what are they what are they giving back? They're giving back to the community, you know, doing something good in the community, supporting people, you know, and that's really important to really sing that in the role itself.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also worth looking at the skill set within the organisation to be able to develop something as clear and straightforward as this. It's always really easy just to cut and paste previous descriptions from other organisations. I think everyone's on the internet search and then cut and paste. It's great, but it doesn't really answer the question, and also it doesn't help you achieve what you want to achieve, which is a perfect volunteer for that role. And just within that role description, just to kind of refresh about what we said earlier, it's about challenging social isolation. It's about looking at encouraging people back into the community setting. It's about giving back, and it's about development as well, which is really important. And I think that's the responsibility that organisations can actually have, and it can be quite a cheap thing as well. So something that can attract volunteers. I know from our organisation, and I know in terms of the local CVSs as well, they will offer either free or very subsidised training sessions. So it's really worth trying to find out what they can offer. And we run quite substantial wellbeing series of training, plus also kind of fundamental training like first aid, health and safety, such as safeguarding. So it's worth catching up on that with your local CVSs. Okay, so this is really interesting, and I think it's something that is forgotten about when we start recruiting for volunteers. Whether we like it or not, we're in a highly intense consumer society. And with that, we get instant gratification is like first and foremost in terms of our needs. We don't really like waiting around for things anymore. We're quite impatient. I don't know whether anybody's personally, or whether this is just me, I don't know whether anybody's personally found waiting in a restaurant for too long or waiting in a queue for too long and people getting impatient. But the reason why there's an out of office sign there is that if people respond to your ads or your request for volunteers, put a message on that you can't always answer there, that you can't reply immediately. So it's actually an important part of the process in itself. It's about this constant communication, even when you're not able to communicate. So a little out of office is really useful.
Yeah, it's vitally important to have a short time frame in getting back to volunteers that you know are interested in the positions that you have to offer. So again, if you're not in the office, like John said, pop an out of office on your email and give a time frame as to when you'll get back to them.
Yeah, I think you're more likely to attract a volunteer by providing this friendly experience and this friendly, efficient interaction. They're more likely to hang on for you. Okay, jump in, Carrie, if I miss anything else. Right, so what we want to look at in terms of the actual body of the management of volunteers. First and foremost, I would try to seek out your line manager. I'm assuming everybody has a line manager here. Yeah, I think it would be important to find out who actually supports the volunteer or volunteers when they arrive, whether it is actually going to be your role. You have to find out policies on expenses. I don't know whether anybody's actually read any volunteer policies, or whether your organisation has volunteer policies, whether there's lone working, if that is indeed applicable, whether there's liability insurance, whether that's necessary or not. I'm not sure about the nuances around your pilot projects, but I'd imagine insurance is probably going to be a feature in that. Risk assessments as well. Safeguarding is actually going to be important. Is there anything else there, Carrie, you'd like to add?
Risk assessing the roles themselves, and also one of the big ones, like you mentioned, Sean, out-of-pocket expenses. That includes travel, but it could also include maybe a lunch if there's funding there, for a volunteer. If the volunteer is going to be doing the role all day, for instance, if they're doing quite a few hours, maybe refreshments could be provided. So yeah, a volunteer doesn't want to carry out a role and be out of pocket. So that's really important to think about that, because that's a big part of supporting your volunteers to and retaining them as well.
I think it might be worth paying attention to any of these boundary drifts as well, if volunteers actually don't claim expenses.
Yeah, it can certainly create potential boundaries, and especially at the moment with the cost of living crisis. Again, nobody wants to give up their time for free and be out of pocket for it as well.
Yeah, that's very. In terms of recruitment,
so we have
Team Kinetic, don't we?
Yeah, we have a volunteering platform called Team Kinetic. Our members advertise a lot of their opportunities on this platform. Your local CVSs, which we'll be sending links out to you, they will more than likely have some kind of platform where you can promote your opportunity, your pilots, via these type of platforms. So it is really worth getting in touch with them and finding out if they have some kind of platform. If not, they'll have an advertisement board on their website for definite. This is quite new to us. We're still rolling this out, really. But we have on our platform over 700, I think it's over 750 volunteers registered to the platform now. So any opportunities that go onto our platform gets promoted to those 750. So like I say, it's really worth finding out if your local CVSs have them and registering on their platforms.
They'll have similar processes though, won't they? So.
Yeah, like I say, they'll have a jobs board on their website if they don't have a platform.
Mm-hmm. In terms of getting closer to the community, I think this is interesting. One of the first questions is, so where do we go? So after you've gone through the CVS and you found out that they have quite a limited jobs board for volunteer opportunities, it is worth taking printouts to parish councils, local libraries, community groups, especially in rural areas, church groups, local shops even. This is where you find your volunteers that want to actually work within community themselves.
Yeah, so create an advert maybe and pop it on their notice boards. Again, word of mouth is very big. Opportunities for volunteers to get into. So they will see opportunities on jobs boards, on your local councils, your libraries, that sort of thing on the notice board. So yeah, get them on there.
Yeah, definitely. These are your assets in the community, so definitely use them.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So during the selection process, now, I don't know whether you're actually involved in this as individuals or whether it will go to your line managers. I'm not 100% sure who's responsible for this. The main key point, though, for any line manager is just decline unsuitable people. If you find that they're not the right fit, you don't have to take them on. So I think it's important to be assertive on that point. And like any job, really go through references, have a trial period. I know if there's any driving involved, it'll be worthwhile to be familiar with a route, to kind of meet the other volunteers or other community members that will be participants in this. And also, what I think is really important is to kind of developing a bank of volunteers. As I think we've all had experience of volunteers that don't turn up. And obviously that is their privilege, but it's important to kind of prepare for that.
Yeah, certainly with the driving role, especially because ultimately, we're here for the service users. And if a driver doesn't turn up, what are you going to do? So it really is important to maybe have a bank of volunteers that you can call on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think it also kind of limits the possibility of burnout as well, because there will always be volunteers that want to do everything. And, they're the really lovely people that want to help all the time. And it's really easy to kind of draw upon their services a little bit too much. So when we get to this interview process, or when they've passed the interview process, I think it's really important to observe this. I think scientists have got it down to 7 seconds that we already make or draw an opinion on people. I think it's about 7 seconds that the brain actually collates some sort of image in their head about that person. So I think it's really important to actually display your personality, to show your positivity about the pilot and the project, to show how useful your organization is in the community and what value it actually has in the community. So don't let this go as well. So when we get to the induction stage, this is as much about meeting your team as well and finding out how they fit in to your team and vice versa as well. This is a collective approach to working with staff and volunteers. Everybody has an equally important role in this process, because let's face it, without volunteers, our projects do not work. And without volunteers, so many community groups, CICs, charities that we work with in CWVA wouldn't exist. So we can't underestimate volunteers. So really, need to push this like personal approach, this easy humor, this acceptance, this inclusivity. And we want to, or you want to show staff members and other volunteers actually enjoying what they do. All of this sends out a message that will retain volunteers essentially. And I quite like the idea of this as well. I don't know whether any pilots here have contemplated this, of a volunteer actually shadowing another volunteer or a staff member on a project.
Yeah. Sorry, John, go on.
No, sorry, Kerry.
I think it's also important to get to know the volunteers who will be volunteering, who will be driving, especially, and accompanying people, because you need to match those personalities as well. If you've got service users who, you know, would like to really have a good chat because they've not seen anybody for days on end, and the driver's quite a quiet person, then maybe that might not be a good match. So think about matching your volunteers as well.
And certain volunteers might actually have skills that you actually haven't accounted for, that might be actually useful on the project. Thanks for the message, Jane. You already do that. And it gives them a chance to talk to other volunteers confidentially
too. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, because that's the real insight, isn't it, Jane? Like you don't get from a staff member. Okay, so we're all looking for volunteers to actually flourish here, aren't we? And it is actually a two-way street. This isn't this isn't all on the volunteers. Volunteers, I think people in general should always feel respected and appreciated by everyone in the organisation. And it's not just the job of the volunteer manager either. I think that does fall on the shoulders of volunteer managers quite a fair bit. The responsibility to organise and care and consider the well-being of volunteers. But I think it's all staff members involved in the project need to look at this as well. So it is very much a collective thing. And it's important that a safe environment is created, where staff and volunteers all support each other. So equally, the project or the pilot flourishes, the organisation grows. Essentially, that's the target, isn't it, for all groups? And it starts with a friendly environment. It sounds really simple, but it works.
Yeah, a welcoming, friendly environment that's supportive to the volunteer helps to retain the volunteers. And that's really important too.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I mean, most organisations do want to invest in volunteers because we know how important they actually are. And so volunteer opportunities, if and when they do come along, it's important that they get put on them or offered to them. And I think touching base is really important as well. And this has to be a casual approach. I think it can't be too structured. I think it can become uncomfortable if it becomes a little bit too corporate. So it can't be just a chat over a cup of tea. And also, your volunteers are quite precious, so we have to be flexible. As organisations that bring on volunteers, we have to realise that not all volunteers can afford the time. So we have to match to what they can offer.
Yeah, so if you can offer micro volunteering opportunities, even better, where volunteers can dip in and dip out, shorter hours, that sort of thing. Again, that really does help with flexibility for, you know, volunteers fitting it into their everyday life.
Yeah, we've all worked with volunteers that are hugely committed to projects or a cause. The problem is this comes over commitment. But I think that can be managed through careful supervision, which again, because not everyone has the time, we're all very time limited in our projects. So these are all ideas that we could possibly work towards, not just immediately carry them out. I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah, John, just going back to supervisions, really important supervisions, and keep them informal as well. Don't do like a formal supervision that you would with a member of staff. An informal chat just to see how the role is going. Again, get their feedback as well, because there's ways in which, you know, you can improve the role from the volunteer actually carrying out the role. So you can gain some really good feedback from them how to change and you know, progress that role. Yeah, it really helps the volunteer to feel supported, and if they've got any concerns, they can feed that back at the supervisions as well.
Yeah, it's about creating that nurturing environment, isn't it? Okay. Also, as well, it's important to recognise talents. There may be retired people that had quite senior roles, in which case then you could create a lead volunteer role, if indeed that is possible, to support other volunteers. It's something that it's worth thinking about and not to immediately discount. And for younger volunteers,
with volunteers, if you see a volunteer that's kind of taking that leadership role anyway, or a volunteer that's been with you for quite some time, and been volunteering for your organisation quite some time and wants to kind of progress into you know, a more senior role, then a lead volunteer is, you know, is a perfect opportunity for them. And also it alleviates some pressures off the volunteer manager or coordinator. So it's, you know, it's a good idea to just be on the lookout for those, that kind of talent, that, you know, the senior person of the senior volunteer.
Yeah, and for the younger volunteer that's just starting out, it's worth looking at career opportunities as well. And I think for a line manager or somebody that works quite closely with volunteers, it's really important to look towards developing via their confidence, and especially through experience as well. So anything that might be valuable to them in terms of an employment opportunity. And also as well, workable rotas. You know, when we talked about the rotas a bit earlier about volunteers that actually don't turn up. Equally so, you know, a volunteer that says yes to all of the shifts as well, it can actually create problems in itself in the long term. You can't rely on just a handful of volunteers. It needs to be broad. Then you can open up to diversity as well. Okay, supporting our volunteers. Pretty sure, like, everybody's had experience of this, and it really is just down to communication. And it's, again, it seems like a really obvious thing to say, but we're not as connected and as communicative as we like to think we are. Specifically because we all have deadlines and goals that we have to personally reach ourselves. So it's very tempting to actually just let the volunteer get on with it. And I think what we need to do is keep those channels of communication open at all times, and to relay the aims of the organisation, all of the goal of the pilots as well, the end point of the pilots, and the kind of continuation points. Is there anything else there, Carrie, you would like to mention on top of that?
No, that's fine. Again, just remember why volunteers are volunteering. It might be, you know, everybody has a, you know, a different reason, about meeting new people, giving back to the community. So yeah, just really support their journey.
Yeah, these are all the points that we made earlier, Carrie, in our group. And it's about the difference that I think attracts a lot of volunteers into projects, and community work. So it's important that they understand what the target picture is. And it's also important for volunteers to kind of fight that social isolation as well, and encourage volunteers to actually kind of meet up. And that can be actually just managing volunteers on certain routes, perhaps. And again, you mentioned earlier, Carrie, about asking volunteers, ask what their input is, because they're the ones that really understand how the project or the pilot's actually going.
And because it is a pilot, it's really important to get that feedback, isn't it?
Yeah. And with that feedback, you know, try to involve them in meetings as much as you possibly can. I know, again, we're quite time poor when it comes to this. But it's really important that volunteers are heard and are seen to be active parts of the organisation as well. So we have to think around the problem. We have to think creatively. about how we connect people and not exclude people as well. I think Carrie mentioned a bit earlier about trying to match people up in terms of personalities. Again, that's just about being observant.
Yeah, and ultimately it's about giving the service user that good experience.
And that empowerment as well. Okay. Shouting about how great your volunteers are. I don't know what you do as individual organisations. I know we have volunteers for a year. We have different roles. Older volunteer, youngest volunteer. We cover the spectrum about this. What we do, we use social media specifically, and I think we use newsletters and e-bulletins mostly. In terms, we don't so much use local newspapers or radio, but they're definitely available if you can use them. I think stories and pictures and stories are really powerful in terms of what you hope to achieve, your pilot to achieve. I think that will tell its story. You can set up Twitter feeds, telling people what your volunteers are doing, or any numbers or stats, or any feel-good stories that you may have. I know some groups that I work with, they're only small community groups, have set up a Facebook group, so they all keep together and communicate through that. And I think what this does is engender an understanding of the staff that what the volunteers actually bring to the project or to our organisations. Also as well, local websites and parish councils that we mentioned before, you can actually send any newsworthy stories that you may have, any feel-good stories that you may have. I think all pilots will have valuation at the end. Is that right, Sean? So you'll probably be, it's worth collating stories quite early on.
Then we're asking for case studies and things like that, and the kind of ongoing data sets that we'll be collating, and then giving an end of period report, I think, as well.
Yeah, but this is great to actually feed this back into the community. So, and really important to this is that we're looking at the end user here, and these are the participants of the pilots themselves, the people that your volunteers will be supporting. It's about like trying to find out what their journey was like, literally, their journey. So I don't know whether any of this is in place with your organisations, pilots, but it's actually to look at the impact the volunteer program has had, the organisational aims, and for the volunteers themselves, really. These can actually be formal, informal as well. Praising your volunteers to show value. Again, we have Volunteer Year Awards. And feedback is something that is really important as well. So if any staff can actually kind of join people on any of the journeys and talk to them about how they felt about their role, all of this can actually go back into the reports and future planning. Right, so also going the extra mile. I'm pretty sure that everyone's got Volunteers Week, 1st to the 7th of June in their diary, is that right? It's probably not.
It's a great way to say thank you, and there are loads of resources out there, especially on the NCVO website. And again, you can get more information on your volunteer programme from the NCVO website and the CWVA website. Under volunteer managers, we've got some great resources and templates that you can use. But Volunteers Week especially is a perfect week to really, get involved with the volunteers. A great chance to say thank you. The NCVO, I think they have templates of certificates that you can print off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you don't just have to use these kind of celebratory weeks to say thank you, do you? Say thank you throughout the program for them actually, you know, volunteering in the first place along the way.
Yeah. On a cautionary point, again, it's about overburdening volunteers. It's quite a common thing for some volunteers to just disappear and you wonder where they've gone. So it's definitely to keep in touch, and it's that communication stream again, to keep that open. And just to try to keep in contact with any means that you've established early on, whether it's email or telephone or text even. And constantly just tap into them and see how they're feeling, and just check for that burnout or why they haven't been turning up. So this is an important retention point for volunteers. So what we run is quite a lot of wellbeing support sessions for volunteers. And this is everything from compassion fatigue, stress awareness, to confidence building. So what we want to do is actually try to protect the volunteer. And this is just a standard kind of boundary, mental health boundary list of things. This is stuff that I passed on to other organisations as well. So it's about protection of the volunteer, because if they're offering their time to you, we should be able to offer them time to actually recover if they need to recover. It's very tempting to rely too much, you see. So I believe, Sean, that this project is about a year long, is it?
It is, yeah. I mean, we're hoping to build in sustainability, and potentially the projects will kind of carry on with their individual pilots and kind of build on that. But for us, it I think runs towards the end of May, off the top of my head.
Right, okay. Yeah. So there are contingency plans together, are they, to continue?
I mean, some of we would hope that the built into these projects is the idea of sustainability. Yeah.
Right, okay. So the big question is what happens at the end of the pilot for your volunteers? So you've nurtured and developed these volunteers over this period of time. It can be quite heartbreaking to say to people that that's the end of the journey. So it's good to start thinking about what happens to them quite a few months before. And again, it's about communication. So if any volunteers leave early, it'll be really useful to find out why. Or at the end of the project, I would probably go for an informal chat or the exit interview to receive this level of feedback. And importantly, look at where you can actually direct volunteers. If you've got opportunities within your organisations that might suit them as well. So it's, again, you've also developed this kind of bonds with the volunteers. So it'd be really useful for you to kind of keep them within your organisation and develop that dedication, really. And also a huge one is to never stop saying thank you.